big thing with shared security responsibility is that there are 3 groups involved who will each have a different role in your cloud security. It's the public cloud providers like AWS, who is primarily responsible in broad terms on infrastructure security. You've got then the end users, all the people on this webinar responsible more for data security and maintaining the integrity of your data. But then you need key, well-regarded strategic partners like Trend Micro to be the 3rd piece of that puzzle. It looks like about almost 70% of people, actually, no, let me rephrase this. About a 1/3 people are actually currently using shared security responsibility. The other 60% are not. I bet that percentage will change after we hear from Aaron. So Aaron, without any further ado, let me turn it over to you to talk about how you work with AWS and how you support an integrated cloud security responsibility model.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate the time. Looks like the slides are up and everyone can see, so I'm just going to get into it. And Ron, if you could keep me honest on time, I'd appreciate it as well. I tend to be able to go off on tangents as discussions or questions pop in. But let's go through and talk about, as Ron mentioned, we're going to talk about the shared responsibility model. And hopefully that concept isn't new to anybody that's in attendance here. If it is, while I'm doing my little introduction here, go ahead and look up the AWS Shared Responsibility Model on AWS or Amazon site while we're discussing this. But let's go through and talk about why the shared responsibility model exists in our opinion, or in my opinion, and what specifically it can do to what you can do to benefit or value from the experience that comes with it. And there's a lot to it. So time after time, discussion after discussion, we tend to have this response of, well, okay, we get it. There's a shared responsibility model, fine. But there's a lot of nuances and there's a lot of value in why this was developed. And we'll go through and we'll talk about both sides of it, kind of what leads up to why you need it. And then once you adopt it and understand how to best use it, to your organization's advantage, how you can then best implement it. And so let's talk a little bit about the precursor to why it was there and discuss, remember we're focusing on security here, right? So why is traditional security so hard? And it comes down to kind of 2 things, and I'm glad that this order, Ron's a master architect right here. He ordered us in the perfect way because, automation is one of the huge components of things. In our customer base, and I'm sure in most of you that are listening here, you're overworked, you're overtaxed. There aren't enough resources for you to be able to do your job effectively. And when you clock out, I'm not going to say go home because nobody's going home anymore because your office is in your home. But when you clock out for the day, your work doesn't end, right? It waits for you overnight till you get to it the next morning, and or some other shift or some third party or some lower tier of expertise takes over. And what happens in our customers space is there's 2,000 developers, right? They're doing agile development and DevOps and pushing and promoting and building and moving their code to various environments. And there's 2 cloud security architects, or there's 1 cloud security architect, or there's 1 team of cloud security architects that have 1 resource across various regions, right? And so there's just this scale problem. There's a lack of visibility that this team has from a security component to see what's happening. And there's not enough automation to take care of the need or the just sheer volume of amount that's coming from the business and or the IT and or the IS departments that's shoving things through the pipeline and through the build process. So what ends up happening is you're supposed to either move fast or stay secure, right? There's not really an option of either, right? You got to be agile, you got to be DevOps, you have to have high velocity, or you got to not be any of those things and be secure as you're doing things. But what you want to move to is an and statement instead of nor statement, right? You want to move fast and you want to stay secure. And this isn't the lost city of gold here. This is actually something that is achievable and accomplishable, and it's built around the shared responsibility model. And so you might be thinking, well, how can I build fast and stay secure around this model, right? So let's take a step and just try to understand what we're talking about as it relates to this. So if you look down at the infrastructure piece, and it's, again, it was great that we had the discussion before us, because this segues perfectly into hybrid models and or different methodologies that you can utilize to build out your cloud. But either way, if you look at what is responsible by AWS as a cloud provider, you see kind of the same traditional spirit of what you saw in your four-wall data center, right? Responsible for the networking, the database software component that supports that, responsible for availability, the racking and stacking, and that sort of mentality. And then when you go up to what your responsibility is, right? It's the responsibility of the application. It's the responsibility of the network traffic, the data that resides in there, the encryption and the key methodologies that are utilized there, the configuration of the firewall, the configuration of the environment, and all this sort of data and content here. AWS has done billions, hundreds of millions of implementations of their infrastructure. Okay, they're the #1 cloud computing company organization in the universe, right? They know what they're doing. They're going to set up the environment correctly, and they've seen this so often and so much that they're actually going to tell you how to do things based on a best practice. And here's where I'm going with this, right? You have this level of knowledge and implementation that's unique and specific to the way that you're going to build something, right? You've got soft phones that you're trying to put in. You've got a voice box that you're trying to put in. You've got an application that you're trying to build. Fine. Odds are AWS has seen this implementation before, or something very, very similar to this implementation before. Odds are somebody's done something very similar to this implementation before on AWS, because remember, this has been around since 2006, right? So if you look at the services and the level of increase of complexity that's been happening, right, just over the last 6 or 7 years, the number of services available has been increasing, and as has the complexity, right? So there's more and more that you can do with AWS's services. The point to what I'm getting at is they give you and have given you a recipe to follow, and that is called the well-architected framework. Now, a little bit of a head fake here, right? I was talking about the shared responsibility model. Well, the shared responsibility model is the foundation for the roadmap that has been built by AWS that's called the well-architected framework. And this well-architected framework allows you to take the best practices of those hundreds of millions or billions. I really wish I could get an answer of how many implementations there have been in AWS that have been spun up and spun down over the years, but it's an order of magnitude, right? Very, very high. So they can take the best practices that have been learned and gleaned from all these implementations and give you a roadmap to follow. And if you're not, while you're Googling or looking up the well-architected framework, I'm sorry, the shared responsibility model, be certain to now go into what the well-architected framework is. What it is broken up into 5 categories. They're called pillars, and you see them listed here: security, reliability, performance, efficiency. I'm not going to read them all to you. You get it. What we do then, or what they do, is they then break apart their services and fit them into various components or pillars of this. And when you align the infrastructure that you're building to this, you build a very, very fast and secure environment, right? So you can adjust and build your pipeline and your application and your DevOps and your DevSecOps velocity aligned to this with a much, much more fast and secure methodology, right? Security doesn't become a barrier. Security becomes part of the way that in which this is developed, right? It truly is a DevSecOps sort of mentality. So let's look at what's happening, and let's look at what has happened in the way that traditional development and development in the cloud from a configuration standpoint has happened. And we're actually going to see this slide build out a little bit, and we're actually going to see it again later on. So try to remember, if you're going to pay attention here, and then pay attention when this kind of comes up once again. But according to Gartner, a lot, 99%, a lot of the security failures that are going to happen from a configuration standpoint are going to be the customer's fault. And that makes sense, right? Because what have we been saying as it relates to the shared responsibility model? What have we been saying as it relates to the well-architected framework? AWS knows what they're doing. They know how to set this up, and they know how to do it correctly. It's more the customer's implementation of that tends to break or be poorly configured, right? They don't follow the well-architected model framework. They don't do a well-architected review. They don't follow the model appropriately. The NSA actually in January released a statement or a paper that very much is similar to what Gartner is saying here. And it said that the #1 threat for cloud in 2020, this year, and 2021 will be misconfiguration of the cloud, right? The customer improperly configuring their cloud environment. And please feel free to look it up, that NSA paper. You know, it's one thing when we say something, it's one thing when AWS says something, Gartner, okay, fine, that's the next level. But, you know, when a three-letter agency, regardless of how you feel about the three-letter agency, you know, says something, it means they've seen some breaches and some data that hasn't been made public that very much confirms what we're talking about here, right? So why is this, right? Why is it misconfigured? Well, the easy answer is you're not following the well-architected framework. The more complicated answer, right, is when you have this build pipeline or this build methodology, there are lots of areas in which you can do or create a misconfiguration, right? You can have a developer do something insecure or create a poor practice of coding that's done here. You can have the repository in which you're utilizing use antiquated, outdated, or insecure frameworks or components. As you build something, a configuration can be pushed and done incorrectly. And as you push it out to the cloud, it can result in something that makes your container compromised. It can result in something that makes the storage or the encryption that surrounds your storage compromised. It can result in keys that aren't properly managed or rotated according to a best practice or policy. And that's where those configuration and issues come up, right? It's those 2,000 builders to those 2 cloud security architects. That ratio just doesn't work, and the lack of automation that has been put in there just doesn't work to make something secure and fast, right? And so what happens, right? You get that lack of visibility, right? You don't see something that has happened until it's already happened. You've got a big learning curve and a gap in skills from a development standpoint. And there's that exploding set of services, right? There's new technology, new services, and new components being pushed out that developers, you know, bleeding edge developers want to adopt, but you don't have the visibility and the ability to kind of make and work through. So what are we seeing from a trend perspective, right? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers globally, right? What are of implementation, sorry, globally, what are we seeing, right? So we're seeing a set of misconfigurations that are common, right? Storage misconfigurations, secrets misconfigurations, permissions, validation, monitoring and logging. And if you think about it, right, if you think back to the issues that data centers or your data center was having, it was probably storage related. It was probably poor key access management. It was probably identity access management related, right? So it's the same issues. They're just utilizing the cloud services, and we're adopting it in a cloud mentality or cloud methodology, right? So, you know, this is what we're seeing time and time again. And unfortunately, we're kind of seeing it all over, right? So apologies. I wanted to build out that slide with one click. Regardless, the capacity for misconfiguration in the cloud is resulting in issues. And, you know, these are the issues that we know about. And I tried to use foundational, bigger ones that people might have or might have heard of or had seen in the news, right? And so what does this do, right? This tells us that breaches or issues were a result of poorly configured implementations of their cloud environment. And who do you think poorly configured it? Was it AWS that did it? Rhetorical question, right? Go to the next one, right? Same sort of thing, right? Misconfiguration due to a poorly encrypted storage, right? Top 5 issues that we said that we had. Storage bucket that was poorly configured resulted in a breach of information, right? And this is happening time and time again. And again, I'm using these as large known examples just so that we can set the tone for what we're saying, right? Top 5 issues, misconfigured, not following the well-architected framework, not necessarily understanding the responsibility, the onus that was on them, or understanding the onus that was on them by following that model, but not having the automation and not having the workforce or visibility in place to see, kind of what was done to do things. And so all the applications that you have that you're building in this environment are different, right? You've got a different set of services and components that are used to build this, right? And you've got a unique implementation that your organization is going to be doing to promote and build this as part of the business need or the application need that you have. But regardless of the journey that you're having, and regardless of the technology stacks that you're using here, if you're using a Docker or a Kubernetes, or if you're using some other component of services, or if you're using some other hybrid sort of setup of the way that this is built, you're building it off of the foundation that is provided to you by your cloud provider in AWS, and you can build it off of the best practices that are suggested by them to follow the well-architected framework. And so this well-architected framework, in my opinion, this is not AWS speaking, right? But in my opinion, was built off of, it started with 4 pillars, moved to 5 pillars, and it was built because of the need that was, from the customer standpoint, that was sorely obvious due to the misconfigurations and the issues that the customers were having to improperly configure and build out the environment. So let's go back to that slide. Remember I said, pay attention to one of the components that's coming up here, right? And we talk about one other thing, and that's infrastructure as code, or software-defined infrastructure. Right, so somewhere along the line, a developer went out and they found a CloudFormation template. And this CloudFormation template, they either built, configured, or kind of just downloaded straight off of some repository, and said, hey, this fits with what I'm trying to do. I'm just going to use this. And maybe it's a 2-year-old template, or maybe it's a brand new template. But regardless, that infrastructure as code that you're utilizing on that CloudFormation template hasn't been set up correctly or with your unique applications infrastructure in mind, right? So you've got this unique infrastructure that's going on. This kind of covers what you're talking about from an infrastructure as code standpoint. So you're going to use this. It's quick. You can stamp out environments and do builds and go to your daily stand-ups and say, yep, we're ready to go. Go, 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 green light. Nobody breaks the build, and you kind of push and promote out from your scratch pad or your sandbox environment all the way to production as quickly as possible. And what ends up happening, right? You don't have the safeguards in place from a security standpoint to be able to map back to the well-architected framework, or map back to the best practices that are suggested from the lessons learned from the shared responsibility model, right? And it goes back to the lack of automation and the lack of visibility that comes from that, right? But wouldn't it be nice if you could also have that visibility, have that automation, and layer on compliance and build into your DevOps process and make this something that isn't a speed bump, but is as quick and as available as the teams that are doing the building are wanting or needing the build to happen. And so when you start to leverage technologies, of which Trend Micro and AWS have partnered to create and build out the platform that's called Cloud One to help utilize this, you get that visibility, you get that centralized location, you get that automation that comes with it, and you layer on compliance, and you layer on configuration and checks that takes what AWS has given you and pluses it, right? So AWS has a wonderful well-architected review foundational service that's available to you. You can ingest all that with our solution in our platform and then augment it and make it 10x as valuable, right? So I think there's 60 some odd checks that are done as part of the scanning and services that are provided to you, again, built off of the well-architected framework, which is hanging underneath the shared responsibility model, right? But then we can go through and augment it and make it automated, make it fast, make it part of your build process into your build pipeline, and make it compliant, right? So we can take the components of various standards that you have to adhere to and add them into, and say with certainty that your cloud environment is configured properly, that your cloud environment is compliant, and that your cloud environment adheres to the best practices that are provided by the well-architected framework and AWS's suggested shared responsibility model. And that's huge, right? To be able to do that continually, right? Because your cloud environment's constantly changing. Your builds are being promoted and taken up and taken down and spun up with high velocity and continual change and dynamic orientation all the time, right? So to be able to say and go and do that is fantastic, right? So what do we recommend, right? What are we kind of seeing? The steps necessary to take control start with, you know, I like the quote that was said earlier, that was talking about, you know, just do what you can, right? Don't try to go through, and it was Merritt that said it, don't try to go through and tackle everything at once, be like, no, we got to get this perfect, it's got to be done, you know, this way all the way through. Implement the right guardrails. Digest and utilize the services that are provided to you from AWS as part of your subscription, or the services that are provided to you, you know, at a minor cost as part of the build that you're doing, right? Start there. Learn to crawl, then start walking, then start running, right? And you can do it in various parts of your organization, because the odds are there are components of your business that aren't the same maturity from a cloud adoption perspective as your team is. There might be a component of your business that's very cloud averse. You know, as Corey was saying earlier on, right? They're just, oh, cloud's scary, we can't do it. There might be an area of your business, maybe it's the marketing team, maybe it's somebody in IT or IS that's making a mobile app, and they're developing a cloud specific components to this, and they're making it something that is very cloud forward. There might be a component of your business that's just all cloud, born native, you know, incubated, they just came and they want to be cloud specific. Regardless, right, you can find the partners to build and pilot the right services to make it fast and secure, right? So utilize that part of your culture to make this a best practice. And then, you know, we talk about shifting left, right? Get as early as possible in your build process, and you can with our technologies to be able to do that, and then integrate into where you can. So if you're using Jira, if you're using various technologies, you don't want to add a new technology onto the DevOps process. You want to integrate into that DevOps process and give them the capacity to be able to develop in the same manner that they have, just make it seamless. And so our technology helps you do that by leveraging the connections and putting instructions embedded into the development process, you know, as it is done via the development standards at your organizations, right? And so what ends up happening? Remember I said, don't try to tackle it all at once and shove it down everybody's throat. What ends up happening is over time, you see this increased compliance, right? You see this shifting, not shifting left, but the shift in organizations to be more compliant, to be better aligned with a well-architected framework, to be better aligned with the model and the best practices of the model that are assigned to you, right? And to be aligned with the compliance frameworks that are tied with your organization. And this is dynamic. And the reality is, you know, you never really reach 100% because you're looking to manage risk, right? You're looking to reduce risk. You're not looking to eliminate risk. Eliminating risk is impossible. But when you utilize the tools that have been given to you by the providers, right, and when you augment that with tools such as Trend Micros to be able to really launch you to the next level, you get to the point where you're truly able to understand and say with confidence, look, we have a good level of compliance, we have a good level of understanding of what's happening in our cloud environment, we've got that visibility, and we're developing secure and fast. So let's talk a little bit about some customer stories and some customer experiences that we had. So these are public that we're able to speak towards, right? And, you know, here this is a little bit of tooting our own horn, but what these sort of customer journeys led on, and the data that I've provided here, and the journeys, I'm sorry, and the best practices that we have are taken from some of these use cases and stories, right? Led us to be, you know, a technology partner of the year for the security competency and the cloud management tools competency, right? So two different partners of the years, right? Point behind that though is the data that built up to it. So we've got a couple of, you know, kind of use cases and stories that we go through to talk about what happens. But really what I want you to focus on is that visibility right? And the automation that leads to compliance standards and best practices here. Because what the solution set ends up providing is what's missing in your environment, right? So when I talked about the scale that comes with those 2,000 developers and those 2 cloud security architects, right? There's a huge gap and a large funnel that's being, kind of shoved down the bottleneck of the cloud architects team. What we want to aim for and what we do when we build off of the well-architected framework and the best practices of the shared security model is an automated, highly visible, scalable platform that will allow your organization to be able to see what's happening from a development standpoint and understand, what needs to be done. This organization has operations all over the world. This organization in particular spins down 50% of their environment after 8 p.m. every day. So the large volume of their customers are from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and they spin up their environment, and at 8 o'clock every day they spin down half. Right, so there's things happening, and it's happening in different time zones, right? So it might be happening on a Sunday for North America, but in reality, it's a Monday morning in Australia, right? So that visibility that needs to happen across those time zones is very, very intense, and it's happening on different days and at different times, and things are being spun up and spun down in different places. So what if the developer that's doing that is new and doesn't use the right template? What if the developer that's doing that, or the third party that's being involved as part of a project to spin this up, does it in the wrong manner or does it in an insecure path, and you don't have the visibility to see how that's being done? We all know what happens there, right? So when you utilize and when you start to take the best practices that are provided to you by the foundation, which is the shared responsibility model, apply it to the well-architected framework, and then layer in or weave in the visibility that's given to you with the solution sets and the platforms, you tend to have a very compliant and much more secure organization that has, kind of looking here, you've seen this little cloud diagram quite a bit in my presentation. There's a point and a reason that we threaded through there, and that's because we're talking about the central visibility that's provided to you with the platform, the Cloud One platform, so that you can easily have that capability to have secure development that's done quickly and truly, kind of weaves in and builds up to your DevSecOps.
Hey, Aaron,
Yeah.
it's Ron Gerber. This is perfect timing. I just want to ask one question on behalf of Chris. If you could specifically comment on how Trend Micro enhances AWS's existing solutions, and maybe provide some granularity on why AWS by itself doesn't completely satisfy your cloud security requirements.
Sure. So I'd be cautious with the word "doesn't completely satisfy," but what I'll say from a Trend Micro standpoint is that we augment, right? We build on top of. You've got config, you've got guard duty, you've got Macie 2, you've got Security Center, right? That are services that are provided to you via AWS, which are fantastic. But remember when I said go back to the crawl, walk, run methodology, right? So you've got those services that are provided for you, of which you're paying for and utilizing to consume, which is a great way to start. Fantastic way to start to get visibility, and fantastic way to start building into the process and the pipeline of your app methodology. What happens though is that exploding set of services with the exploding usage and various different implementations. AWS, huge organization, right? Many different departments, areas, business units that are doing lots of different things. Very different focus, right? So from a security standpoint, the security focus isn't as I'll say dynamic as the business need that has been popping up, and so you have services like ours which fill that gap, right? So we're able to say, well, take those 70 services and multiply it times 10, and we've got all the additional services that need to be covered and all the different components that are done from a business unit. AWS will provide those services eventually, but it's a big steamroller that we're kind of running in front of in a good way, laying the foundation for with the different services that are there. You should know that we have a free knowledge base that provides you with what I'm talking about, so you don't have to pay to get access to what I'm saying. So, take config, Macie, Security Center, guard duty, all those, control tower. and look at our knowledge base, and you'll see kind of how we augment and improve that.